everyone, today's video is going to be about customizing your controller beyond what the game already offers. Unfortunately, this means this is not available for those on the PS4. If I ever figure out how to do this on PS4 or any other consoles in the future, I will be sure to let you know, but for right now, you can watch if you're really interested. But anyway, to customize further, you will need an advanced remapper. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's fine, just keep watching. Once you see what I do, you should have an idea. I will be using the Steam Controller API, which you can use even if you're not using the Steam version of Final Fantasy XIV. However, if you want to use some other software, you can, as long as it supports the same features that I'll be showing. So I'm going to start with a Strafe. I did do a Strafe video once using Antimicro, but that was using its basic features. Antimicro actually does have advanced features, and so if you are willing to learn about those, you should be able to do this. But this is going to be about not doing a one-to-one button mapping, but rather a combination for something a bit more, well, fluid. Anyway, let's get started. So as you can see, I am in the Final Fantasy XIV Realm Reborn section that I added to Steam Big Picture. And I do want to say that I added this. I am not using the Steam version of Final Fantasy XIV. I am using the regular PC version, and I forced Steam to add it to its library, which is how you can do this even if you are not running the Steam version. So, in a shortcut, controller config, select my Switch controller, and I used browse templates to go back to this very generic style that will just do what you expect it to do. But I want to add a Strafe. Actually, the first thing I want to do is remove that screenshot, so now it's pretty much like having any other controller. We're not using any extra buttons right now. Action layer. So I'm going to actually name my action layer, and if you're wondering what an action layer is, I will cover that. I'm going to name it based on what I intend for it to do, which is I want to set up my Strafe by using my analog stick, but only if I have another button pressed, specifically my bumpers. Either one of them. So I'm going to call this bumper. It will be very clear that this is the things I'm going to change when I have my bumper activated. And in my bumper, I'm going to select the analog stick, and I don't want a joystick move. No. I'm going to change this to directional pad. You could do 8-way, I'm going to go to 4-way. And so basically, it's going to pretend that it's like a D-pad. It's still going to be the joystick, but it's going to pretend it's a D-pad. That's why you can have 8-way if you want to assign, 2 buttons to it. And what I'm going to do is actually tell it to go to my keyboard. So on the up, I'll press W. Now it's going to be S. My Strafe is Q. The other Strafe is E. W, Q, E, S. Of course, it doesn't know to use this yet. It's just saying that whenever I end up activating this layer, these will be overridden. The other ones that are soft colored just means it will use whatever the default has. So how do I tell it, hey, I need you to override this? Well, let's pick the left bumper. There's a button here to change layers. I could use apply, which puts on the layer, but then you have to remove it. Kind of annoying. And I could use hold, which means that while I'm holding this, you can do it. At first that sounds like a good thing, right? I don't want to display action set, and I don't want to beep, because beeps are annoying, and this will actually show something on your game as an overlay, which I find very annoying as well, because that's where I see my hotbars. So none. And I want to switch the bumper. It's done. So as you can see, I'm going to press nothing. I'm just going to use my analog sticks, regular movement. And I'm going to press my left bumper. Now when I use my analog sticks, you can actually see on my keyboard capture that it's capturing my keyboard, even though it's not being used. It's just literally doing a strafe. But if I'm still holding this and I press the map button, normally it would actually do a filter change, and it's not. It's actually doing map button. What this means is that I no longer have the original left bumper functionality, and that's bad because I want to keep that functionality. So what do I do to not only have my additional strafing, but keep the original functionality that existed to begin with? We go back here, at bumper, we tell it we want the binding for this to be left bumper. So default is going to say put on the action layer, and then the action layer is going to tell it, well, you know what, the bumper still does the bumper, but we're going to keep this override as well. Now if I go back to Final Fantasy XIV, using it normally, now I'm going to activate my bumper, use the strafe, and it's doing my filter switches, which means it would also keep my targeting, like party targeting, no, not party, enmity list, and alliance. Right? So that's all good, but if I let go, it's still sticking. And the reason is, if you override it, the hold changes to an apply. Unfortunately, it's forced that way. So you can either go back and put the other thing as an apply so that it's obvious that it's actually an apply, or you can just treat it like an apply but still keep calling it hold. So we go back to Steam, go here to, specifically, we are in bumper layer, go to our left bumper, and we're going to add an extra thing. We're going to go to show activators. And so by being held, it's still going to do its bumper thing. We're going to add an activator called release press. And that release is going to remove the action layer of bumper. So now I am using my controller normally. L1 is activated. You can actually see on the video that it's recognizing L1 as L1 because it's lit up as blue. My strafe is on. L1's still activated, right? So if I wanted to do some targeting, I could. I mean, I'm not in a party, I don't have enemies right now, so I can't really show you that. But I can still show filters, which work. And now that I let go, I am back to normal. That is how you add an extra thing without changing the original functionality. The key to that is make sure that whatever you're overriding didn't have a special combination of 14. At the end of the video, I will actually have a list of things that are safe, semi-safe, and definitely unsafe to remap. Now, I wanted this to happen regardless of which bumper I was using. So I'm going to go to Control Fade, and I'm going to repeat the same thing. Right bumper is going to, and I could use apply because essentially I'm using apply. But in the off chance that I ever remove it, I do want that to stay, or not. Should I? It's really up to you. Hold or apply, because either way it's going to be apply. I wanted to pick apply just to make it clear that it will work either way. And then in here, we repeat the same thing. Right bumper, show activators, release press, remove, bumper. Go back. Go back to my game, and I'm going to use right bumper, and see it on, and I've got my Strafe, and I still have the ability if I want to switch hotbars. Nothing is removed, no functionality is lost. There is no delay, it's an extra combination that I set up. And that's the end of the strafing section. So the next thing I want to change is actually my AutoRun button. I've had accidents with AutoRun because the AutoRun provided for controller by Final Fantasy XIV is to use the targeting button. And so there have been times when maybe there were actually ads and I was trying to change which one on the enemy list to use because I prefer using the enemy list targeting than just filter targeting. But even when I was using filter targeting, if I had to switch a filter or if I was healing somebody in Alliance, there have been occasions where I accidentally auto-ran, sometimes into my death. And that's not fun, that just isn't. So I disabled it, and because I am on PC, I just settled for, okay, if I want to auto-run, I'll just read from my mouse and click my mouse scroll wheel because that is what I have mapped for AutoRun. Could be different for you. That doesn't mean I want to do that. I would like to use my controller to do that, I just don't want to use left bumper. What I want is a different combination. And after thinking what would be safe, the safe thing to remap that I chose is right trigger with start. So now is the question, how do I do that? So going back here, you might be thinking, oh, okay, so you're just going to do the same thing, but with the right trigger. I could, but I'm going to do it differently just for the sake of showing you alternate ways of configuring. So instead of doing the action layer version and using hold, which in here would be changing this, and then of course doing the same thing on the other side and the layer itself so that it's treated exactly as anything else. I mean, I still wouldn't recommend it because that could change the way double tap works, but if you're not a person that uses double tap, it's definitely an option. But I really want to minimize how much I change that. So instead of doing, oh, I'm going to make a layer for when right trigger is active, R2, I'm going to go the opposite way, which is, I'm going to tell the start button, hey, do this when the right trigger is active. So you're still pressing the same order, which is right trigger, then start. But how I go about telling the program to do that is going to be different. So I'm going to go here, and I still want to do the thing it normally does when I press it normally. So I'm going to go to show activators, and add an activator. And this one's going to be called corded press. The binding, like I said, my AutoRun is on my scroll wheel here. Make sure you pick what's associated in your keybinds in Final Fantasy XIV. And then my corded button is going to be my right trigger. Let me go into the game. I'm going to now do this AutoRun. Hopefully it was captured. Let me double check that it was captured. You can actually see my mouse scroll wheel. I have it on the keyboard layout. It's right there. This is it. Like if I hold it, I'm actually holding my mouse right now, you can see it. But now I'm going to do it with the controller. And it's perfect. So, the third example, and this will be the last one I'll be doing step by step, is actually something that's been sort of asked a few times, and that's if I have extra buttons, for those of you lucky enough to do that, especially a paddle or a grip button, or I saw a controller that had extra buttons on top, would it be possible for me to map that directly to the double-crossed hotbar? And the answer is sort of. Sort of. So I'm talking about the difference between this and this. Would it be possible to just have a button that goes directly here without having to double tap? So let's go back to Steam Controller API. Make sure you're on default. This is the only extra button I have on my controller, so that's what I want to use. Of course, in real life, I would never use that because that would be extremely uncomfortable to do if I had to also move at the same time and try to press buttons. But I needed something to use it. Ideally, you really do want to use something that would still allow you easy movement to your face buttons and to your movement analog stick. So a paddle really is best, or a grip button. But I'll be doing it here. And of course, you would need one for both the left side and the right side. I only have one, so I want to pick the right side. But that's not enough. Activators. First thing is we're going to change this regular press to a start press. Then we'll add another activator, right? Because you're trying to get it to essentially press twice for you. And we don't want a regular press here, we want a long press. So the idea is that because you're holding it, it's going to end up doing the double. But you don't want to keep it doing repeatedly, over and over and over, like it's every second. You just want to do it once more, just because you're holding it. And it needs to be fast enough that it doesn't feel like you're holding it for too long and possibly clipping yourself. But it can't be so fast that the game doesn't think you're double tapping. But it's still pretty fast. So make sure it's right trigger. And we're going to bring it down, not all the way to 0, but somewhere around here. Depending on your settings in Final Fantasy XIV regarding how much time you have to double tap or not double tap, you may need to adjust. But somewhere around here-ish. Don't trust that number that you see. It lies a lot. Just base it off of the rough distance, and of course try it out. Don't need to change anything else. So just saying that after this amount of time, it's going to do another press. And now if I go back to Final Fantasy XIV, I'm going to hold this. Make sure you can see. Because unfortunately it's not going to be easy for you to see on the controller thing, because the controller is the controller that Final Fantasy XIV sees. So you'll be seeing it as the right trigger, and not as me holding it here. This is the button. Right here. The setting that I was talking about that you may have to play around with is in System Configuration. Actually, no, it's not. I lied. It's in Character Configuration, Hotbar, Cross, and that's your input timer. I have it set to 50. But yeah, if you happen to have extra buttons, here's a way to do it. So I did promise you at the beginning of the video-ish that I would have a list for you of things that are okay to remap, and this is the list. There will of course be a link in the description to the document for you to use if you want it. So, there is a legend. It is color-coded, but if you're colorblind, every single one of these is unique, so it's not an issue. Safe means you can absolutely remap it, go ahead, have fun, do whatever. NR means not recommended. You could, technically could, but those are for the ones that end up being double taps. And the thing about doing a double tap in Steam is that I found that if you're still trying to do the single tap version, it's going to wait to find out if it should be doing the double tap, and that's causing essentially a latency for you. And so when you're trying to play smoothly and possibly not clip yourself, it's not ideal. So I wouldn't recommend these, but you could. Doable and modify are two sides of the same coin. They're both about, it's okay to remap this if you're okay with losing the functionality or willing to handle it elsewhere. The difference between doable and modify is that in doable, you're remapping it directly, whereas in modify, you're actually turning it into a modifier to then change something else. So, an example, which I will have already made, where I used the select button to remove away its HUD functionality, right, to go to this layer, where instead it's going to actually do the click filter, it's a special filter, and then I remap the face buttons, one of them to actually do something else entirely, the mouse, which is how the click filter works, and one of these is the HUD filter and the other one is start, just to show that if I wanted, I could actually remap start to here, and therefore that would free up the fact that I could use start as its own layer to do whatever else I wanted to do. And so, looking at Final Fantasy XIV here, now when I press it, it's activating the click filter. Now, most of you probably don't know exactly what a click filter is. You probably have only used it for the sake of removing players when you look at things, without actually removing the whole HUD. It's very useful. But based on whichever click filter is available, which right now I have actually set it to show me who it's going to, then if I press the button, it will target that. I actually do use this with my mouse when I play PvP. But likewise, if I wanted to use HUD, actually, this is start, this is HUD, it's remapped, and it will work. So, while I removed the existing functionality, I did make sure that that functionality still existed elsewhere. And that's essentially what the ones that are marked as modify are. You could use it to then create a whole set, a whole new layer, but you probably should still make sure you don't lose the functionality and put it somewhere else within that layer. Whereas doable means this is the combination of directly changing. So the first one is just no modifiers, changing it directly, and therefore in this case that's why it's a modifier, is because you're creating that into the modifier. And this one is, oh, I'm using L1. So within the L1, if you're a person who doesn't care about using the screenshot feature, because if you want to take a screenshot, you'll just settle for the fact that you can reach for your keyboard, well then you can reuse L1 and start and do something else with it. Likewise, if you don't care about hiding your HUD by doing L1 plus HUD, well, you can remap it. Do it. There's a few of these, so if you don't use the controller filters, then all of these can be remapped, or some of them. Maybe you only use 3 filters and not all 4, so you could remap one of them. And that's the idea. The NRs, as you can see, are definitely double tap, so this is, if you're trying to use the R1 modifier with R1, essentially creating double tap, I don't recommend it. And I went through, I'm pretty sure this is accurate. If there's any issues with it, let me know. And there's even something, a note I made about tap target, is that when it comes to tap targeting, which is the actual thing called tap targeting, right? A lot of people get this wrong where they think using the D-pad is tap target, and they'll say the tap target in this game sucks. That's not tap target. That's actually filtered target. If you see my targeting video, I explain the difference. Tap target is when you use the trigger and the bumper together, and you can actually do it by pressing the trigger first and then the bumper, or pressing the bumper first and then the trigger. It is the bumper that always determines the actual movement of it, whether it's going left and right, or right to left, or if you use it like a cone, like I do, near to far or far to near. That's determined by the bumper. And so because of that, I personally always do, I'm going to press my trigger first and then press my bumper if I'm going to do a tap target. It's done very quickly, but that's what I do. And therefore for me, if I wanted, I could make it so that if I press my trigger, my bumper first and then my trigger, I could customize that. It's an option I have because I always do it the other way around. But if you do it so quickly, you could end up having mistakes. So if you're going to remap this, it's definitely in the doable category, which is you're okay with potentially messing it up, and you have to account for that. So the safe category is very safe, but the doables and modify always account for what if you set it up incorrectly. Make sure you test it, and you should be fine. And so, yeah, this is it. This is the end of the video. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please let me know in the description. And I do want to mention that you don't have to use Steam Controller API. I haven't tried actually doing this on Antimicro, but, and I'm just going to show this real quick. Right, so here's Antimicro. At first, I thought this was a one-to-one. You can actually see my original attempts at doing this for one-to-one strafe, saying, oh, this button's E and this one's Q, but that means you need to have a one-to-one mapping. However, if you go here to Advanced, you can do a set selector, and from there pick another set. And then you go to that set and change things. So that's essentially the same thing as the layers in Steam. And this is if you want to change it entirely as a one-to-one. I'm not sure about the double tap, if that one will be doable, because there is a turbo delay, but I don't know if it repeats. But at the very least, for the ones that are just, oh, I'm going to create a modifier or add this extra configuration, and not the double tap one, you should be able to do this in Antimicro. You don't have to use Steam Controller API. If you're a Mac user, I don't know what's available for you. I really don't, but if you find something that essentially lets you do this, have fun. And that's it. Bye bye!